All right, so we just talked about carbohydrates, so let's move on to our next macronutrient of fats. So here's the thing with fat. For so many years, fat was the enemy, right? 1990s, people took fat out of everything. All foods were low fat. But of course, they had to add something back in to give it some taste, right? So the thing they added in was often sugar. This is really when we start to see the obesity epidemic start to creep up. So fat is not the enemy. But just like with carbohydrates, we want to think about what kind of fats we're eating. Fat is essential because it's our principal form of stored energy, right? So remember carbohydrates. We don't have a very large capacity to store carbohydrates for energy. We have a really large capacity to store fat. Any low intensity exercise, anything aerobic, your body's going to be burning fat. So principal form of stored energy. And just like carbohydrates, we want to think about what kind of fats we're eating. So you have your saturated fats. We consider those kind of the quote unquote bad fats. And then we have our unsaturated fats. And for the purposes of this class, we're going to talk about monounsaturated and polyunsaturated in one group of fats just called unsaturated. So you have your bad fats and then you have your heart healthy fats. So here's a nice picture of where some foods fall on the spectrum. So you have your beneficial fats, things like salmon and tuna and other fatty fish, some nuts and some oils and some avocado. Those are all your good fats. Then we have our saturated. We have our red meat, our butter, our cheese, our ice cream. So here's a question. If the saturated fats are the bad fats, why don't we just go ahead and cut them out altogether, right? Get rid of them. We're not going to eat them at all. Well, there's a couple reasons we don't do that. So first of all, they taste good, right? So everything in moderation. We don't want to cut entire food groups out unless that's a personal conviction, right? But there's no need to cut entire food groups out. Also, they give us some other things. So red meat, you're getting iron. Your dairy products, you're getting calcium. So no need to cut things out altogether. We just want to think instead about moderation. Here's a nice picture showing us some saturated fat content of certain meats. So if you take a look at this, you can tell that the leanest meat is actually turkey, followed by bison, followed by chicken, pork, and then beef. So beef by far has the highest saturated fat content. However, it does give you a good source of iron. It gives you a good source of protein. So again, we just want to think moderation. Don't eat red meat every day, but certainly moderation is just fine. So there's actually two types of fat that circulate in the bloodstream. So we have our triglycerides. That's how we store most of our fat, right? That's what we then break down and use for energy. A very small amount is actually stored as cholesterol. Now we hear a lot about cholesterol because it can accumulate on the walls of the artery and it can actually lead to heart disease. So let me talk just for a minute about cholesterol. Most of you are probably too young to have had your cholesterol tested before, but at some point in the future you certainly will. So often we're told our total cholesterol number, right? And desirable total cholesterol is less than 200. But what's actually more important than the total cholesterol is the breakdown. Your low density lipoprotein, or your LDL, versus your high density lipoprotein, or your HDL. So the LDL is the bad stuff, right? It's the sticky stuff. It's the stuff that accumulates on the walls of the artery. It can cause heart disease. So look at the picture at the bottom. The yellow stuff that's clumped there, that's your LDL. Now your HDL, that's your good stuff. That's your high density lipoprotein. That's actually the heart healthy cholesterol. It's the green stuff in the picture. It can actually come in and it can help to clear away the bad stuff off the walls of the artery. So when we think about our cholesterol numbers, ideal cholesterol would be high HDL and low LDL. I'll say that again. If you're taking notes, write that down. Ideal cholesterol numbers are going to be high HDL. Okay, we want the HDL as high as possible, and low LDL. Okay, so low is optimal. Do that. And there's lots of different ways, but when we're talking about diet in particular, we want to eat more of the unsaturated fat, and we want to cut down on those saturated fats, okay? So fat should be about 20 to 35% of your total calories. Certainly limit the saturated to 7 to 10%. So choose the heart-healthy things like olive oils, canola oils, nuts, avocados, lean meats, low-fat dairy products. Our third macronutrient is protein. So protein is the second most abundant substance in the body. You might not be surprised that water is the first. We often think of protein in terms of muscle building, right? And it is important if we're trying to gain muscle mass because we're essentially breaking down that muscle tissue and we need the protein to build it back up. But protein is important anytime that we're developing and repairing, whether it's bone, muscle, skin, blood cells. So it has a lot of really important things outside of strength training. Proteins are made up of amino acids. I'm sure you've heard that before, and we have 20 of them. 11 of them are non-essential. That means our bodies can manufacture them. But 9 of them are essential. We have to get them from our food. Now, if we choose to eat complete protein sources, typically we're talking about animal proteins, but there's some exception, things like quinoa and soy. Those complete proteins give us all the essential amino acids that we need. Okay, so we don't really have to think about it at that point. We're getting what we need. If somebody chooses not to eat those sources, then they're going to have to do what we call complement incomplete proteins. So put 2 things together to get all of the essential amino acids. So some examples. Let's say somebody eats rice and beans. Well, those together are complementary proteins, and they're getting the 9 essential amino acids. Or leafy greens and grains. Again, complementing each other to get the essential amino acids. Here's the good news. You don't have to sit down and eat these at the same time. You just have to make sure they're present in your diet. So how much protein do we need? The recommendation is typically about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight or 0.36 grams per pound of body weight. Somewhere between 10 to 35% of your daily calories. Certainly somebody who was pregnant or fighting off infection or recovering from surgery or doing lots of muscle building activity is going to need more protein. Now, protein supplements are really popular on the market, whether that's protein cookies or protein powders or protein bars. But it's important to understand that eating lots and lots of protein does not necessarily equate muscle building if we're not putting in the work at the gym. Any excess protein, just like anything else, is going to be stored as fat. So be careful of the supplements if you don't actually need them. Here's some protein sources. So you can see, 100 grams of chicken gives you 28 grams of protein. You get good protein from salmon. So people who eat animal products typically are not protein deficient. If you choose not to eat them, you may have to be a little bit more creative, but you certainly can get protein in lots of different places. So just a quick word about protein powders because they are so popular. Probably many of you either take or have taken a protein powder. First of all, most are complete protein sources. The most popular is whey protein that comes from milk. That's a complete protein source. But it's important to know that they're pretty high in protein. Okay, a lot of them have at least 20 grams per scoop. So the important thing is to check your diet. Know if you actually need them, right? And if you are protein deficient, it can be a good source of getting protein into your diet, But if you don't actually need it, it can be pretty hard on the kidneys and the liver to metabolize. And again, all that unnecessary protein will just be stored as fat. So be careful of protein powders. Just check your diet, see if you actually do need them. Our last macronutrient, water. Okay, so we know we need water. We know there's a lot of negative effects of dehydration. So the recommended intake is 9 cups a day for women, 13 cups a day for men. Now, please understand these are very general guidelines. This is based on somebody expending 2,000 calories a day at a very moderate temperature. If you're someone who's doing a lot of exercise or burning a lot of calories or in a hot or humid environment, you're certainly going to need more water. So listen to your body, stay ahead of your thirst, make sure just to get a lot of hydration. You can certainly stay hydrated through things other than drinking straight water. Fruits and vegetables are mostly water, so you can be creative in staying hydrated, but just make sure, again, to stay ahead of that thirst.